A boy opens his eyes and sees several cute maids excited to see him. His totally normal first response is to cast a fireball and incinerate them all, but just before he does so, he realizes that his hands are tiny. That brief moment of distraction throws his aim off, so he misses the maid and instead ends up blowing a hole through the castle walls instead. Fortunately, thanks to the fact that a fireworks show was going on, his blast did not cause a terror alert in the kingdom. The people are celebrating the birth of the new Prince Lloyd, while inside the castle, the maids are beginning to consider switching careers before they get turned to ash by this trigger-happy baby. Some time passes and we see that the maids decided to keep their jobs, but only after updating their life insurance policy. Right now, they are busy looking for the prince and can't find him anywhere, but moments after they leave, Prince Lloyd pops out from behind a pillar. He wants to get as far away from here so they don't find him, but as he was leaving, he ends up bumping into some officials. He asks them not to tell the maids he is here and they agree, but one asks if Lloyd would like to join them for some hunting to pass the time. Unfortunately, he is pretty busy right now, so he ignores the offer and just runs off to do his own thing. The official is disheartened that he was rejected by Lloyd again, but the other guy asks why he is even bothering to try making friends with the kid since he is too young to contest for the crown. Plus, he is only the 7th prince, so gaining his friendship won't be politically advantageous. To this, the first official has one thing to say. The kid could blow up a castle on the day he was born, and I don't think he needs another reason to stay on friendly terms with him. In fact, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Lloyd may be the reincarnation of the father of sorcery, but that's only speculation. Back to Lloyd, he is indeed a reincarnation, although he was just a regular sorcerer in his past life. He doesn't know why he remembers his last life, why he is reborn as a prince here, or whose bright idea it was for him to wear this outfit. One thing he does know is that since he has the freedom to do so, he will live the same way he lived in his past life, and spend it all researching all kinds of wonderful magic. He is mesmerized by the castle's extensive library collection, and thinks it is even better than the one he had access to in his previous life. However, just before he could open a book and start reading, he gets it snatched away by a maid. Silpha has finally found him, so he can no longer skip the rest of his lessons as he pleases. Outside, Lloyd now has to go through sword practice with Silpha, and she is showing no mercy against this 8-year-old, but he's still holding his ground. Lloyd doesn't see a reason why he needs to go through with all this training since he is too far down the line to ever have a shot at the royal throne, but Silpha retorts that there is more to life than just trying to gain power in the family. It's only proper that since he is a member of the royal family, that he should be educated in all manners of subjects. She was put in charge of his education 3 years ago, so she's going to take her job very seriously and make sure he learns stuff. Lloyd doesn't like how insistently diligent Silpha is, but he knows she won't let him skip out on practice until he shows her some improvement. She tells him to get back into stance, and the two cross swords once more. However, this time, Lloyd is able to match Silpha's moves exactly. She is impressed by the amount of improvement he is exhibiting since she can see that he has gotten better, but Lloyd thinks to himself that he is actually using something called control-type magic to copy her moves exactly. In other words, he's cheating on his swordsmanship exam. However, even with him copying her movements, he's still only got the body of an 8-year-old, so she is stronger, taller, and has more reach than him as well. He's going to have to find a way to make up for the differences, since they put him at a huge disadvantage, so he comes up with a brilliant solution. He's going to cheat some more. He casts a spell to make his wooden sword grow longer, and another one to make him physically stronger, as well as one to make him levitate, so now he is able to fight on equal terms with Silpha. Eventually, when he sees an opening, he switches tactics and stops copying her technique in the middle of his attacks, so she is thrown off guard and he plans to take advantage of that to strike. However, she's still an extremely skilled swordswoman, so she was able to block his strike regardless. She confronts him about cheating just now, and Lloyd is scared that he got caught. She assumes he must have done it to make up for the difference in ability between the two of them. And honestly, she's pretty impressed by it. That means he must have been using 2 spells at once, and even the palace court mages find that difficult to do, so it's a really advanced skill. Lloyd is just happy that she didn't scold him for using magic, but he chooses to leave out the fact that he was actually using 4 different spells at once instead of just 2. Later that evening, it is time for Lloyd to take a bath, but unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you think about it, he is forced to take his bath while sitting in the lap of Silpha in the maid's bathroom. He finds this whole situation to be incredibly embarrassing, but Silpha refuses to let him leave and bathe himself since last time she did that, he couldn't even shower and spent all his time reading instead. My guy just wants to read some books, but instead he's surrounded by so many opie that he doesn't know what to do. One of the other maids warns him that if he doesn't behave himself, then he'll be taken by the demon of the Forbidden Library. Lloyd had never heard of this Forbidden Library or the demon in it, so the girls recount the whole story. Long ago, the kingdom of Saloon was nearly destroyed completely. However, after the sacrifices of countless mages, they managed to seal the demon away inside a book. The name of this demon was Grimoire, and he is supposedly sealed away in the castle's Forbidden Library. Silpha doesn't believe the story is true, and she is sure Lloyd wouldn't be scared by something as silly as that. However, Lloyd is fighting his own demons after being surrounded by so many girls in the bath, so he can't bring himself to look them in the eye. They misunderstand this and think he must actually be scared of their story, so they start offering to let him sleep in their beds tonight if he wants to. Lloyd manages to slip away while they argue over who gets to stay with him. And now that he knows there is a forbidden library, he can't just not explore it. That night, Lloyd sneaks through the castle halls until he finds the corridor that should lead to the forbidden library. He then proceeds to cast an air spell on himself to conceal his presence. It changes the density of the air around him and causes light to refract around him, making him practically invisible. One of the guards is falling asleep, but the other tells him to stay awake since they are meant to be guarding magic that could potentially destroy the kingdom in the wrong hands, as well as a sealed demon. All the while, Lloyd is walking past them as they talk about how good they are at their guard duty. They are definitely getting fired after this, aren't they? There was still a second layer of protection in place to stop people from getting into the library though, and it is a seal that was cast by 10 powerful mages using their strongest sealing magic, so there should be no way anyone is getting through that. Well, it didn't take much for him to get through it, so I guess the mages are getting fired as well. After Lloyd has made it into the library, he is amazed that despite living here his entire life, he has never once seen this place. He starts looking around at all the interesting books available, but he reminds himself that he has to replace that barrier so people don't lose their jobs because of him. Just then, he sees a book fly out from a pile, and out pops the demon, Grimoire. He is impressed that such a young boy managed to break the seal on the door to the library, so he tries to persuade him into unsealing him as well. However, even if he doesn't, the seal on Grimoire is probably just going to collapse on its own since it has degraded over time. Grimoire tries to bribe Lloyd with some gold nuggets, but Lloyd isn't fooled by his words. This gold is made from creation magic, and on top of that, Grimoire made this stuff really poorly. He also tells Grimoire that he'll be redoing that seal once he is done here. The kingdom has a lot of books he can read, so he can't let something like Grimoire possibly destroy it all. Grimoire tries convincing him by promising that he won't destroy the kingdom, but Lloyd isn't falling for it. As a last attempt, he says he'll teach Lloyd some ancient magic if he releases him, and Lloyd is immediately ready to throw the entire kingdom under the bus if it means he can learn more magic. He asks if Grimoire will really teach him some ancient magic, and realizing he's got the kid hooked, Grimoire tells him that he definitely will. He also tries buttering him up by saying he must be really talented with sorcery. This brings back some painful memories from Lloyd's past life, where he was discarded for his lack of magical talent, but that's changed since he now has the body of a member of the royal family. He creates a magic key and uses it to destroy the book that was holding Grimoire, and once he is free, he can't believe Lloyd actually destroyed the seal just like that. Lloyd is still excited to get his ancient magic lesson from Grimoire, so he asks for the lesson to begin. Grimoire takes a look at him and proceeds to chuck a ball of purple fire at him, calling it Lesson 1. He believes that must have killed Lloyd, so he's about to get out of here and go destroy the world or something. But then Lloyd pops out from the smoke, completely unharmed. Grimoire can believe that Lloyd is still alive after taking a direct hit from his spell, and Lloyd is praising it for being so unique. He would love to see some more, and Grimoire just can't accept that Lloyd survived, so he starts firing off many more spells at him. However, not a single one manages to break through the barrier around Lloyd, so Grimoire is confused how his barrier could be so powerful. Lloyd is watching in amazement as he analyzes the spell, but even though he knows it could possibly kill him, he wants to see what it feels like to take the attack with his body. Lloyd opens up a hole in the barrier and takes a bit of the purple fire in, much to the shock of Grimoire. It burns his finger really badly, but he seems to enjoy it regardless. And this is the moment we find out that Lloyd is seriously messed up in the head. He tells Grimoire to show him something else, and not wanting to lose to a child, Grimoire pulls out his trump card and grows his second spell so he can dual cast his magic. And although this would have annihilated anyone who wasn't the main character, Grimoire is getting worse matchups than Jogo did. Once Grimoire sees that Lloyd has effortlessly canceled out his most powerful spell, he gets the message that he cannot handle this kid in a fight, so he tries to get away from him as fast as possible. However, just as he was about to leave, he crashed into the barrier Lloyd had set up around them ahead of time. The castle is right above the library, so he didn't want them finding out he was down here. Grimoire asks if Lloyd thought he was going to try and run away, but that's not it. A long time ago, he made a mistake that raised everyone's life insurance, so he likes to be extra careful when he's using magic. He also put barriers up around all the books so that they wouldn't get burned up. But just when Grimoire was about to try throwing another magic spell, Lloyd stops him and says that he has seen enough of that one already. Now he wants to see what kind of defensive magic Grimoire can use, so he uses one of his own attack spells. It's safe to say that Grimoire is not going to enjoy this, and after the blast has ended, we see him laying on the floor as a defeated demon. Lloyd comes up to him and asks why he didn't use a barrier to defend himself, but nothing Grimoire could do would have saved him from that attack. Afterwards, Lloyd uses some magic to return the room back to normal, and Grimoire has been thoroughly tamed from his experience with Lloyd. He tells Lloyd that he is an amazing mage, but Lloyd thinks he is the one who is amazing since it turns out that demons can't be killed by magic, although it still hurts a lot. Lloyd is interested to find out just how much punishment Grimoire can take since he is supposedly immune to magical damage, but Grimoire doesn't want to agree to that, so he pledges his undying loyalty to Lloyd on the condition that he doesn't torture him. Lloyd agrees to take him on as a familiar, but torture will still be involved. Only slightly though. He tells Grimoire to transform so he doesn't scare people with the way he looks, so he turns into this chibi-looking goat and plans to butter him up so he can take control of his body. However, when Grim tries to do so, he ends up staring into the bottomless pit that is Lloyd's mana reserves. This made it clear to him that nothing he tries against this kid will work, so he is better off just being obedient and not causing trouble. With all that settled, Lloyd heads off to enjoy reading in the Forbidden Library as much as he wants. While still enjoying his reading session, Lloyd receives a visitor in the library which Grim alerts him to. He doesn't think much of it and just tells Grim to hide since he doesn't want anyone seeing him. But once the man speaks to him, Lloyd perks up because it turns out that it's his big brother Albert. Lloyd accompanies Albert for his daily training, so he, as well as a couple servants, all stand around as he gets ready to fire a spell at some targets. Albert casts a little flame spell so he can fire at the target, and while it's just a little one, size isn't all that matters. He uses his spell to strike the target dead center, so everyone gives him a round of applause. Grim asks Lloyd if Albert is really the second prince of the kingdom of Salome, and Lloyd confirms as much. While he is no main character, he is decently capable physically, as well as being pretty smart, so it's not strange that people consider him a good candidate to succeed the throne. With the authority he possesses, he is allowed access to various facilities within the castle to keep his skills sharp, and sometimes he invites Lloyd to join in. It's one of the few occasions where Lloyd is permitted to cast attack spells within the castle, so he never passes up the opportunity. However, he wants nothing to do with the succession of the throne, so he can't be doing anything too fancy lest he gets dragged into the battle. Lloyd fires all his shots and barely grazes the target each and every time, which makes the brown-nosing noble look down on him for not being able to hit the targets. However, Albert won't be so easily fooled by Lloyd's facade of incompetence. He tells Lloyd that he wants to take a little break, so he is giving him free rein to do whatever he wants on the shooting range while he is gone. Lloyd is excited to get the whole shooting range to himself for once since there are a bunch of new magic spells he would love to try, like the double incantation thing Grim did when he was fighting Lloyd. Grim pauses for a moment and tells Lloyd that it's impossible for him to pull that truck off since it's something that only demons can do because they can grow a second mouth. Lloyd realizes he is right, so he comes up with a solution to the problem. He's just got to absorb Grim into his body and grow an extra mouth on his hand, no big deal. Grim is obviously shocked by the series of events that caused him to end up as a 10-year-old boy's hand, but he's just going to accept that Lloyd is crazy enough to try anything once. Since he now has a second mouth, Lloyd is ready to begin double casting a spell, so he asks Grim if he'll be able to follow along. Grim is confident in his spellcasting abilities, so he says he's ready to begin at any time, and they begin casting their spells in sync. However, Grim quickly realizes that he isn't built for the kind of exploits Lloyd's brain is running on. He asks what the hell Lloyd was just doing, but Lloyd is confused since he was just doing some basic spell stacking. Spell stacking is the process of abbreviating an incantation by adding in several other incantations to shorten the cast time. However, what Lloyd was doing was layering hundreds of spells on top of each other at once when normal spell stacking is done with 2 or 3 spells max. Grimm didn't sign up for this, so he backs out of the double casting agreement, and since he doesn't want to do it, Lloyd just decides to handle it himself. He takes over Grimm's mouth and is now able to speak out of both his own and Grimm's, so he begins the double casting again. Grimm doesn't like the idea of having his mouth used against his will, but it's not like he has much of a choice since Lloyd has already begun casting his spell. Lloyd is combining different spells like he's the Honored One, and even though he knows damn well that what he's about to do isn't safe, he's got to try this spell out on something. He gets ready to fire it off and simultaneously raise the insurance premiums on the entire castle. The blast is seen all the way over in town, but back with Albert and the Brown Nosers, they begin asking him why he chooses to give Lloyd so much attention when they don't think he is talented enough to warrant such treatment. Albert tells them that they must be blind to have not noticed the way Lloyd was shooting at the targets. Grazing a target once could be a mistake, but doing the exact same thing 10 times in a row, that is a choice. He knows Lloyd is a prodigy and may one day grow up to be a grand sage, so paying attention to him is not wasted effort and could even be of great benefit to him at some point in the future. Although at his core, Albert just wants to get along with his little brother, which is why he let him have the range to himself so he can practice for real. The Brown Nosers still don't think Lloyd could accomplish much at his age, but as he looks outside, he starts wondering why it's nighttime in the middle of the day. Over at the shooting range, Lloyd has just blown up the sky. That's just something he can do now. But it would cause serious problems for him if the sky just permanently had a hole in it because of him, so he starts freaking out and trying to get it to go back to normal. Thankfully, the sky goes back to normal after a moment, so Lloyd thinks everything should be fine. However, by the next day, conspiracy theories have already been made regarding the mysterious hole that appeared in the sky the day before. Lloyd is more intrigued by the other article in the newspaper, so he checks it out, and it talks about an A-ranked adventurer party that managed to clear a really difficult dungeon and gather treasure, including a bunch of magical items. As soon as he saw that, Lloyd decided that it was time for him to head into the dungeon without thinking twice, but Grimm had to pull him back because it's obviously a terrible idea for Lloyd to just disappear from the castle randomly and head off to a dungeon. People are going to go crazy looking for him, but Lloyd has a plan to take care of that as well. He just needs to make them think he is still here, so he pulls out an acorn and casts a plant spell to make a replica of himself from it. Once the spell is complete, a perfect copy of Lloyd's body is formed down to the smallest details, and thanks to the different materials used, it feels the exact same way as regular skin and bone, plus Lloyd can make it move the same way he normally would. Grimm thinks a copy like this might actually allow Lloyd to leave the castle unnoticed, but Lloyd says otherwise, since if this worked perfectly, he would have been using the spell already. The problem here is Sylpha, since she is so obsessed with Lloyd that the other day, while he was reading on his bed, she was able to tell that he had grown an extra 0.07 millimeters, which is creepy in its own weird way. Lloyd is sure that he won't be able to fool her with a brain-dead copy like this, but he's got another plan for that, which is where Grimm comes into play. Lloyd slips out of the castle undetected, so as he is flying away, he calls back to Grimm to get a report on how things are going in the castle. Grimm answers, saying he can hear Lloyd loud and clear, as well as get good visuals through one eye, and as far as standing in as Lloyd's replacement, Grimm is pretty sure he is doing alright. At least the regular maids can't seem to tell the difference yet, but he can't get over the fact that Lloyd didn't even hesitate to rip Grimm's soul from his body and put it inside the wooden copy. Then he took Grimm's body and reabsorbed it into his body so they could maintain communication. Since everything seems to be going well, Lloyd tells Grimm to keep pretending to be him but to keep an eye out for Sylpha and avoid her at all costs. Grimm takes some time to admire the craftsmanship of Lloyd because this body is pretty much the same as the real thing, even complete with a mana-circulation system. Just then, he realizes that with Lloyd out of the castle, he is free to cause as much mayhem as he wants, but he forgets that he is still on speaker. Lloyd ignores the obviously evil laugh he just heard and tells Grimm that he appreciates the help and is counting on him to keep suspicion down. Grimm is touched by the fact that Lloyd actually trusts him, so tears begin to stream down both of his faces. Lloyd asks if there's something wrong, but Grimm just tells him not to worry about it and to just come back as soon as he is done. However, Lloyd realizes that although he went through all this trouble to get out of the castle without getting noticed, he doesn't actually know where any dungeons are. As he tries to figure out what to do from here, he looks down and notices a girl being chased by a group of orcs, but he decides to watch to see what happens rather than intervening. The girl was running really fast, but don't mistake her running away for weakness because in a split second, The girl takes a deep breath and turns around before drop-kicking one orc in the stomach so hard that she has to dig herself out of its guts. She then launches herself in the direction of another 2 orcs, which are killed as soon as her kicks connect with their faces. Finally, one more orc tries to get her from behind, but she performs a technique which instantly turns the last one into an assortment of monster parts flying in the sky. She stands victorious over the orc corpses in the most glorious of camera angles, and Grimm recognizes that she must be a martial artist, and Lloyd is intrigued to see what she can do since he knows about foreign countries that use energy called chi to fight. Now that she is done with the orcs, the girl addresses the person hiding over on the mountain because she noticed that she was being watched. Since he has been spotted, Lloyd wants to head down to talk to her so he can ask her about chi, but Grimm stops him and points out that it would be really bad if she saw him since he would easily be recognized as the 7th prince. Lloyd realizes Grimm is right, so he just chooses not to come out, but that plan backfires because the girl takes the silence to mean whoever is watching her is an enemy. She then proceeds to run up the mountain, so Lloyd is panicking since he doesn't want her to find out his true identity. As she lands on top of the mountain, she finds Lloyd, who has transformed himself into an older version of himself. He introduces himself as a rookie adventurer named Robert, and the girl is completely starstruck. Lloyd had used illusion magic to change his appearance, but transformation spells are all limited to people whom you have seen before, so in order to hide his identity, he used double casting to combine an illusion of himself with one of Robert, thereby creating a new person which probably still looks like someone from the royal family, but it's the best he could do. The girl introduces herself as Tao and says she's a B-ranked adventurer, so Lloyd and Grimm assume she doesn't suspect anything. The reason Tao suspects nothing is because her brain turned to must after seeing Lloyd. In her 18 years of life, she has never had a boyfriend before, so she left the dojo hoping to meet someone. However, it turns out that most guys don't actually want their head crushed between her thick thighs, so she's been out of luck in the dating market. However, since fate has brought her a hot guy, she will make sure he becomes her boyfriend. Robert tries to get away by saying he wants to go clear a dungeon, but Tao immediately offers to join him, so the two head there together. In the dungeon, Tao is killing monsters left and right, all to impress Robert with how strong her thighs are, but he is more interested in the random rocks on the ground than he is in her. They continue through the dungeon, and Robert asks why she chooses to adventure alone, so she answers that she hasn't been able to find any good party members due to the lack of candidates in the hot guy category, but Robert fits her criteria perfectly. They sit down to share a meal, so Robert takes the opportunity to ask Tao about the chi she had used earlier. She is surprised he knows about it since people in this country generally have no idea about anything other than magic. Robert knows it is greatly dependent on the way you breathe, and Tao adds that chi training is entirely based on breathing techniques. It allows you to circulate the chi in your body and reach physical heights that normally wouldn't be possible. Lloyd begins trying to copy what he had seen Tao do earlier, and after just a few moments of practicing, he is able to feel the chi circulating in his body, although he nearly blows up his lungs because his body isn't used to the force. Tao can't believe he was able to copy the technique just by seeing her use it a couple of times, but she warns him that it's really dangerous to attempt this kind of thing if your body hasn't been trained to handle it. However, she has no idea how little Robert cares for his well-being as long as he can learn something interesting from the experiment. Since he seems really set on learning about chi, she offers to teach him a thing or two since they are together anyway. But once Robert thanks her, her heart skips a beat, so she tries to calm down by instructing Robert to keep the chi breathing up constantly. And the whole time, Grimm is just watching things play out, knowing Tao is getting catfished by a 10-year-old. Grimm enjoys his time by living the relaxed life Lloyd refuses to indulge in, but things take a worrying turn once Silpher shows up. Back to the dungeon, Tao has just used a chi blast to defeat the dungeon boss, and now that that's done, the treasure chest precariously placed in the center of the open room unlocks. Robert is intrigued by the mechanism the chest uses to detect whether the wolf has been defeated or not, and Tao is growing even more infatuated with him by the minute, especially since she sees that he is strong enough to learn chi breathing on his first try, so if she keeps the relationship going, there's no way her grandpa can reject him as her future husband. Robert calls her back over so they can open the chest together, but once it is opened, a slash is aimed right at Tao, which Robert notices in time to drag her out of the way. The slash was caused by the dungeon's hidden boss, the Lich, and Robert is excited to see what it can do. Tao is terrified of the Lich, but when Robert asks about the monster, she acts as if everything is fine and tells him he should leave the dungeon without her. He protests, saying he wanted to stay and watch the battle, but without saying another word, Tao gets close to him and hits him with a strike that blows him out of the boss room. It makes no sense for a lich to be hidden in a low-level dungeon like this, since they are so powerful that even A-rank adventurers have trouble dealing with them. She may not be able to win, but she at least wishes to buy enough time for Robert to escape. Meanwhile, Robert is currently flying back through the tunnel after Teo's strike, but he is disappointed since he had a lot more he wanted to learn about Qi from her. He creates a magic barrier to stop him from flying back, but even if Tao wanted him to leave so badly, she could have at least given him a map or something because Robert is completely lost. He tries contacting Grimm, but he gets radio silence from him, aside from a message begging him to get home soon because he is in trouble. Meanwhile, Tao is still fighting the Lich and she seems to be holding her own, but with the damage she is taking, sooner or later she's going to end up losing. She really doesn't want to die, but she takes solace in the fact that she helped Robert get away. She then tries slowly backing away to see if she can escape as well, but as she tries this, the Lich starts talking. It recognizes the martial arts she uses and says it has eaten someone with a similar technique before, but after gaining that person's knowledge, he realized that Qi is nothing more than an inferior version of magic, so he sees no point in eating Tao to learn about it. But Robert, on the other hand, seemed quite intriguing, so he would have loved to take a bit out of him. This isn't the first time Tao has heard someone insult her Qi martial arts, as most people on this continent just think of it as a useless technique. But when Robert saw it, he actually thought it was impressive, so that made her happy. The Lich doesn't get why she is telling him this or why she would think he cares, but Tao is done talking. She takes a deep breath and charges at the Lich with all the strength she can muster. Even if the Lich raises a barrier, she doesn't stop pounding away. She has been training her body to use Qi for her entire life, giving up her precious time and never getting the chance to have a boyfriend, so she's not going to let him insult the technique. She unleashes a full-power Qi blast at point-blank range, which breaks through the Lich's barrier and sends it flying back into a wall. Unfortunately, using that much Qi also left her body completely exhausted, so she can barely move at all now. However, the Lich wasn't defeated by her attack and even found it rather pitiful for an ultimate attack. All the Qi she could gather in her body is ultimately inferior to even a single finger's worth of his own magic, so he tells her that she's gonna die now. The Lich brings down a magic slash, but instead of killing, the slash cracks and falls apart as Robert has returned and put up a barrier. He says if Tao is done fighting already, then he'd like to give it a shot, but he's got to get home soon, so he'll have to make it quick. She is surprised to see him back here again, and even more so when she sees the deranged look in his eyes, so she just stays silent. The Lich begins casting a spell, so Robert does the same and immediately disappears from view, dashing along the walls and appearing behind the Lich. He takes a deep breath with the technique Tao taught him, but his body still isn't used to it, so he breaks a few ribs in the process. The Lich casts another attack spell, but Robert still needs more time to think, so he pulls up a barrier to stop the Lich from hitting him and starts reflecting deeply on what he needs to do to complete his new technique. The Lich can't believe someone could make a barrier so strong that it deflects all his attacks, but Robert isn't even thinking about the barrier, and instead is trying to figure out how to combine both Qi and mana. He recalls something Tao had said about focus being very important, so he resolves to focus more on his breathing. He draws air into his lungs and simultaneously casts a full sprint air spell to refine their combination. Because he starts moving, the Lich gets full of himself and believes Robert must be fleeing since he can't win, so he sends more attacks his way. Meanwhile, Robert is still trying to take deeper breaths, but the barrier is getting in the way, so he has to get rid of it. The Lich once again misunderstands and thinks his attacks finally broke through the barrier, so he is now certain that he must be more powerful than Robert. Robert grabs onto a stalactite and is finally able to get enough airflow to properly combine his mana and Qi, so after jumping around for a bit and breathing, he's finally able to mix them together and create a balance. With this newly acquired technique, he is able to counter the Lich's magic slashes, although he is far weaker than he would have liked it to be. To compensate for the weakness, he makes the energy thinner and stronger so it will reach the Lich. The Lich casts more attack spells to intercept Robert's attacks, but as time goes on, the attacks coming from Robert become more potent and plentiful, but he isn't even casting a spell for it, so that must mean his attacks are Qi-based. The Lich can't believe he is being overwhelmed by a technique as rudimentary as Qi, but Robert keeps piling on without pause. He continues making the slashes thinner and sharper until he finally perfects the technique. The Lich sees what's coming and gives up on counterattacking, so he pulls up a barrier and attempts to tank the hit. However, with his perfected technique, Robert is able to cleave right through the Lich and his barrier as well as the cave they are in. After that, Tao is even more in love with him than before, so as they prepare to leave, they check the chest to see what they went through all this trouble for and find nothing but a rusty old dagger. It doesn't seem like it's worth anything, but Robert thinks he might be able to do something with it. After the treasure is taken, the chest begins to sink into the ground, but while Robert is confused, Tao tells him that it's perfectly normal since this always happens. The dungeon falls apart after the treasure is taken, so Robert realizes it must be part of a survival mechanism, so the chest must be something like the dungeon's core. He immediately tries to grab it out of the ground since it seems interesting, but the dungeon is collapsing around them, so after he gets the chest out, they leave. Outside, Tao says she is surprised that Robert used chi to fight at the end instead of magic since he is a mage, so she was wondering if he wanted to prove that chi is a viable technique. But that's not it. He just thought it would be fun to try it out. Just then, he remembers that he needs to get home soon since Grimm is in trouble, so he gets ready to fly away. Before he leaves, Tao reflects on what happened and knows Robert was able to figure out a technique called Chi Blade on his own in such a short amount of time, so she has to become better so she can keep his attention and hopefully get him to be her boyfriend. Robert agrees to this sentiment, but as he is flying off, Tao realizes she never got to ask him for his contact info, so she'll probably never see him again. Robert undoes the illusion spell to go back to being Lloyd, and after a short cross-country flight, he is returned to the castle and starts looking for Grimm to make sure he's alright. But he is totally not alright. After Sylvia caught him, he was forced to do sword training, but since he only uses magic, his sword skills are incredibly lacking, so Sylvia thought Lloyd was getting soft and made the training even harder on him. Later, after Grimm has psychologically recovered, Lloyd shows him the knife he got from the dungeon and Grimm can't believe he had to endure Sylvia's beating because of a stupid knife. Lloyd apologizes again but tells him that the knife may actually be pretty valuable since it's special. He dips it in a bit of hot water and starts scraping away at it until he literally peels the magic off it. As he suspected, the knife has been treated with magical essence, the same stuff that is used as a catalyst for enchantment, which involves writing magic formulas onto a weapon to strengthen them. In the case of the knife, the enchantment placed on it was one called Boost Power. After peeling off all the enchantment stickers, he places them in a beaker and shakes them vigorously to get rid of all the old enchantments. Lloyd would like to research enchantments, but since this is all the mana essence that was used on the knife, and the mana essence is really hard to come by, he doesn't have many opportunities to learn by trial and error. If an enchantment he tries fails, then both the mana essence and weapon will go to waste, which is why he has a better idea in mind. Instead of just using the mana essence here, he'll analyze it using magic so he can make his own. He uses a purification spell which breaks down objects into their base elements, so with it, he is able to find out that the mana essence is made of oil, silver, and something called hematite. But even if he knows that hematite is pretty hard to come by as well since it is made from crushing monster cores, but that shouldn't be a problem for Lloyd since he happened to snag the core of the dungeon so he can make hematite from that. Now all they need is oil, silver, and a bunch of weapons to test out enchantments on. Lloyd goes to meet his father and asks him for some spending money, so the king just pulls out a bag of silver coins to give him since he loves his son. Although he finds it strange that Lloyd wanted silver instead of gold coins, but he doesn't question it. He wonders how Lloyd is going to use his allowance, and we see exactly how he plans to use it as he starts melting knockdown with Grimm. Later, Lloyd is fighting with Sylvia again and uses some new tricks to try and get an edge on her, but even after using full sprint, she is still able to keep up with his movements. He takes it a step further and uses magic to make the ground uneven so he can get the drop on her. But once he goes in for a strike, he finds that Sylvia has disappeared, but he is unaware that she is simply hiding inside the dirt construct he made, so he gets obliterated. Sylvia won the battle, but she still gave Lloyd the oil he wanted even though the agreement was that he needed to be able to land a hit on her to get it. She says it is fine since she is just relieved that his poor performance last time they fought was just a fluke. Lloyd is grateful and promises to show her what he makes once he is done, but Sylvia assumes he's cooking something. After returning to his experiment room, Lloyd and Grimm add the oil to the rest of the ingredients, allowing them to make the mana essence. Now, all they need is a bunch of weapons to test the enchantment out on, so Lloyd goes to Albert to ask for his assistance in acquiring some. Since Albert has a bunch of loyal knights under his command, Lloyd was hoping that he would get them to allow him to enchant their weapons, and since Albert asked them to do it, all the knights immediately hand over their weapons to him. But they don't have much confidence in Lloyd being able to get it right, so they silently cry over their lost swords. Grim is a little upset that the knights think Lloyd is going to mess up the enchantment, so he is even more determined to get this right on the first try. Lloyd starts in on the first sword and absolutely fills every inch of space available. However, he soon finds out that regular steel isn't able to handle that much enchanting as the sword shatters to pieces. He keeps trying and swords keep breaking until he eventually manages to get some of them to work. Then by the next morning, Lloyd goes to show Albert his achievement, and he is shocked that out of 120 swords, Lloyd actually managed to successfully enchant 50 of them. Even he thought that Lloyd would just destroy all the swords, but as he inspects them, he is amazed by what he sees. The best enchanters only have a success rate of about 10%, so Lloyd having a 40% success rate is outstanding. One of the guards doesn't believe Lloyd actually accomplished what he claims to have done, but when he tries to sheath his sword, the sword ends up being too sharp for it due to Lloyd's enchantments. Albert is taking a look at one of Lloyd's best enchanted swords when Lloyd comes up to him and asks if he can see how the swords perform in combat, so Albert invites him out to join him for a monster hunt he has to go on. After making preparations for the next day, Lloyd, Albert, and Silpha all head out in a carriage at the break of dawn, and they have soon made their way into the forests surrounding the kingdom. Lloyd asks if the monsters are close by yet, but Silpha has to inform him that it's going to take a little longer since they need to make it to the lake first. Silpha turns to Albert and thanks him for allowing her to accompany Lloyd on this expedition, but he saw no reason why she shouldn't be allowed to join. Plus, he knows how much she loves Lloyd, so he wouldn't want to keep her away from him. Silpha may have inappropriate feelings for Lloyd, but she won't admit that at least until he turns 18. Albert continues teasing her a little more, but when Silpha draws her sword, he realizes he may have crossed a line and stops talking. However, the sword draw was not because of his teasing, but rather because they got some uninvited guests to deal with. These are kobolds which have armed themselves with steel weapons, so the knights get into formation and prepare to defend Lloyd and Albert with everything they have. Lloyd has to act like he's scared to not draw attention to himself, but the truth is that he already knew the kobolds were coming long before they arrived. During his time with Tau, she had taught him an application of chi that allows him to sense his surroundings at all times as long as he keeps his breathing going, which is pretty handy for exploration. The knights are about to begin fighting, so Lloyd pays close attention as one of the knights slashes a kobold. The knight, the kobold, and the horse were not prepared for what happened next because the kobold is split in half like a stick of butter. It makes no sense to them how their weapons are able to cut through the kobolds so cleanly when they are wearing steel armor, but it's all due to the success of Lloyd's enchantments. The swords are now so sharp that even these trained knights are scared to handle them. Albert has nothing but praise for Lloyd and his amazing enchanting skills, so he gives him a lot of head pats. Silpha also praises Lloyd's enchanting skills, although her weapon wasn't enchanted to begin with, but it doesn't look like that stopped her from decimating kobolds anyway. Just then, a kobold goes straight for Lloyd, which he is aware of, but before it gets too close and forces him to act, the kobold is kicked away by a familiar face, Tau. She sensed a hot guy in the area, so she came rushing over, but Lloyd is shocked beyond belief because he was certain that he would never see her again. Tau turns her attention to Lloyd, and she can tell that he is using chi breathing to sense his surroundings, but since she doesn't know he's the same person as Robert, she has no idea where he could have learned it from. But now that she thinks about it, Lloyd looks a lot like Robert too. However, while she was examining his face, she sensed a kobold trying to sneak up behind her. Before she knew it, Silpha had already stepped in to kill the kobold, and she is not happy about this unknown girl getting so close to her future husband. Tau tells her that she could have handled that kobold on her own, and the two obviously aren't going to get along, but to prevent any conflict, Albert acts as a mediator and invites Tau to join them as they head to the lake. Later, as everyone is setting up camp for the night, Albert thanks Tau for her assistance with the kobold attack and introduces himself as the second prince of Salum. Tau hadn't realized he was royalty, so she apologizes for her rude behavior earlier, but more importantly, she thinks Robert is hot. However, despite him being hot, he's not the same guy as Robert, even though he looks similar to him as well. Albert asks if he looks like the person she is looking for, but if anything, she would say Lloyd looks more like Robert in general. With that said, Lloyd is currently avoiding Tau, so she doesn't figure out he is Robert. Using the spatial detection chi technique ended up almost blowing his cover, but now that Tau knows Lloyd can use it, it would be strange if he suddenly stopped using it altogether. To avoid getting his little dungeon expedition secret revealed, Lloyd decides that he will just hide out in his tent for a while. But as he enters, he is immediately assaulted with a face full of melons. Lloyd isn't flustered by this since he has seen her like this hundreds of times at this point, but he asks what she thinks she is doing right now. Silpha apologizes and says that she just wanted to change her clothes since she got some blood stains on them, but that still doesn't explain why she is doing that here though. She thinks it's only natural to change clothes in Lloyd's tent because she's going to be sleeping here with him, but Lloyd doesn't like the sound of that. Silpha tries to justify it by saying the other guards are all posted around Albert's tent to keep him safe, so she needs to protect Lloyd as well, but Lloyd still maintains that he's going to be fine on his own. Silpha still refuses to take no for an answer and grabs hold of Lloyd with her legs, and she refuses to let him go because Tao is around and Silpha will not risk having Lloyd stolen away from her by the caked-up martial arts girl. Speaking of which, Tao walks into the tent because she could have sworn she sensed Robert using chi, but she sees Silpha suffocating Lloyd. Silpha gets angry that Tao interrupted her time with Lloyd, but Tao calls her a pervert. The two are about to begin fighting with all the knights placing bets on who will win. And in all the chaos, Lloyd walks away with his innocence having been shattered. He walks over at Albert, who compliments him on having girls fight over him already, but Lloyd doesn't see the humor in all this. Albert is serious when he says that Silpha has changed a lot since she started looking after him, but Albert has some words of warning and tells him to be careful about the minds of relationships he has with women like her. Meanwhile, Tao and Silpha have just realized that all the knights are eagerly spectating their fight, as well as Silpha's exposed thighs, so they put their differences aside and go out of their way to beat all of them up. Silpha finally puts on some clothes, and Tao explains that she was tasked with fixing up an old shrine at the top of the hill, which is why she's in the area. But if that's the case, then Silpha tells her to hurry up and get her job done so she can leave Lloyd alone. Tao doesn't appreciate being told how to do her job, but Albert interjects and says it would be dangerous to head all the way up to the mountain right now, and her chi spatial sense is really useful for detecting threats, so he would like her to stay with the group until morning. However, as Tao senses an imminent threat, she doesn't think they'll need a scout anymore because they found the monster they were looking for. The beer wolf charges at the group, so the knights get into formation to defend against it, while Lloyd just gets behind Silpha since he doesn't want to finish the fight too quickly. The bear wolf seems to be awfully fast considering its size, but while Lloyd finds it pretty interesting, Grim is more intrigued by the old shrine up on the mountain. As the fight with the wolf progresses, Tao saves one of the knights with a chi blast, but it seems like it will take more than that to take down the wolf, so Albert steps up to the plate. He pulls out the enchanted sword Lloyd had made, and with it, he casts a fire spell that obliterates the wolf in one hit. All the knights praise their prince for being so powerful, but that spell normally wouldn't be as powerful as it was just now. It was boosted by the enchantments Lloyd had applied to the spellbound sword, so Albert thanked him for making it easy to defeat the wolf. Lloyd is glad that his enchantments are well appreciated, but Grim gets his attention to let him know that they have more pressing matters at hand. That shrine up on the hill that Tao is meant to fix has a demon sealed within it, and the seal seems to be worn down. Suddenly, the bear wolf that Albert had just defeated stands up once more with a dark aura surrounding it, and many more monsters appear around it as well. From the wolf, a voice talks down to the humans, cursing them for daring to harm his minion. He is the demon Pazuzu, and even though he's crazy ugly, he swears to take the lives of each and every one of them for what they have done. He orders all of his minions to attack, so the group steps back in order to defend. Albert slashes at one of the wolves, but in the next moment it was able to regenerate from the wound and nearly bite into Albert. Luckily, Tao steps in to save him at the last moment, but the situation isn't looking good since the wolves are all able to regenerate from any damage they take, no matter how severe. Everyone is fighting for their lives while Silpha just stands and watches because she doesn't care what happens as long as Lloyd remains safe. Lloyd hides behind a barrel to ask Grim if he knows Pazuzu, since they both happen to be demons, but Grim has never met him before. But despite that, he is able to tell that Pazuzu is controlling the monsters by transmuting his magic. It's kind of like making magic puppet strings that allow you to control someone else, and on top of that, he is able to supply mana through the strings to regenerate any damage the wolves take in an instant. Unless Pazuzu himself is taken down, then this fight is never going to end. However, Lloyd stopped listening after he found out that there's something called mana transmutation, so he wants Grim to teach him how to do it. Grim doesn't think now is such a good time for that since the others are fighting for their lives out there, but Lloyd cares way more about learning than if his friends and family die, so he insists on Grim teaching him immediately. Meanwhile, Pazuzu is laughing his butt off since he is having such an easy time attacking these humans. But once Pazuzu insults Lloyd because he thinks he is a coward, all gloves are off with Silpha. She tells Lloyd that she's going to have to leave him alone for a little bit, and Lloyd is so engrossed in his transmutation lesson that he doesn't care what she does. Silpha steps up to Pazuzu and proceeds to call him an assault on all her senses with his ugly face and stanky breath. And since Lloyd is nearby, she can't allow him to pollute the environment any longer with his presence, so she'll kill him now. Pazuzu finds her threats funny because he sees no way she can win with just a sword. The wolves are under his control and will heal indefinitely as long as he supplies them with mana, and demons almost never run out of mana, so he can do this all day. However, Silpha's only response to that is that he should please stop talking because his breath is doing more damage to her nose than any attack ever could. Pazuzu stops wasting time and immediately attacks Silpha, but by the time he realizes what's happened, Silpha has already cut off all his beowulf's feet. Pazuzu refuses to lose to her, so he begins regenerating his wolf's feet, but as he does this, the others realize that the rest of the wolves seem to have slowed down considerably. They'd figure out that this is because Pazuzu is currently focusing his mana on regenerating his own wolf, so Robert asks Silpha to keep damaging it like she just did so they can finish off the rest of the wolves, and she is happy to comply with his order. But while all this is going on, Lloyd is having a blast learning about the intricacies of mana transmutation. Grim explains to him that it is no easy feat to pull this off, and Pazuzu is insanely talented to be able to control so many monsters all at once. Back to the carnage happening meters away, Silpha has just wounded Pazuzu once more, and as she lands next to one of the knights, she asks him to let her borrow his sword. She is entranced by the sword, and more importantly, by the fact that it was enchanted by Lloyd. But since he sees her attachment to Lloyd, Pazuzu starts talking about how he plans to dissect Lloyd and study his organs to find out what she thinks is so special about him. This makes Silpha unbelievably mad, and Pazuzu takes the opportunity to pounce from behind and eat her whole. However, that does not mean he defeated her, as from inside the mouth, she uses her swords to carve the wolf up with her dual blade technique. She then slashes its head off as it returns to the ground. However, she wasn't satisfied with just that, so she uses another dual blade technique to rip him out of the body of the wolf and carve him up on the ground for maximum suffering. Everyone is amazed after witnessing what Silpha can do when she gets serious, but Lloyd already knew she was strong, so it doesn't surprise him. Pazuzu dared to threaten Lloyd in her presence, which is an unforgivable sin in her eyes, so she draws her sword to his neck and prepares to finish him off once and for all. However, Pazuzu still had one trick up his sleeve and unleashes his foul breath upon the land. On the other side of the battlefield, Tao and Albert have just finished off the last of the monsters that were attacking them, but Albert says they can't celebrate yet because the monsters will simply regenerate eventually unless they defeat Pazuzu, so they need to go and assist Silpha in finishing him off. But just then, Pazuzu's vile breath reaches them, and everyone except Tao is instantly brought to their knees. Even Silpha succumbs to nostril violation as she falls to the floor, so Pazuzu takes the opportunity to regenerate his body and complains that he spent a lot of time making all his puppets, but they were all slashed up in an instant, so he's going to make sure to get his revenge for that and swats Silpha across the lake. Albert wants to go help her, but he can't muster any strength in his body at all. And Pazuzu explains that the weakness they are all experiencing right now is due to the effects of his miasma of domination. However, as Pazuzu attempts to finish Silpha off, his attack gets parried by Tao, who is ready to defend Silpha despite not liking her. She asks Silpha if she is able to stand, and Silpha doesn't want to look like she's weak, so she's perfectly fine, but she doesn't look fine at all. With the last of her strength, Silpha tells Tao to run to Lloyd and protect him, but then she loses consciousness shortly after. Pazuzu praises Silpha for being able to hold out for so long even after being exposed to the largest amount of his miasma. Even the monsters only lasted about 30 seconds before they were completely under his control, but with that being said, he dashes behind Tao and says he wonders why she isn't under his control yet. Tao reacts and tries to kick him, but Pazuzu dodges and grabs her leg before knocking the wind out of her with a punch to the back. He has figured out that she must be using a special breathing technique that is allowing her to withstand the effects of the miasma, but after that punch, her breathing has been disrupted, so she'll succumb to the miasma soon at this rate. Pazuzu mockingly tells her that she could have escaped by herself since she was still able to move, but she chose to stay behind, so that must mean one thing. She wants to become his special minion. That creepy tongue movement he was doing weirded Tao out so much that she found the strength to punch him straight in the mouth and break free. She then puts everything she has into one final attack and blasts Pazuzu into the water. But as she lands on the ground, she realizes she acted too rashly as she shouldn't have used such a big move so recklessly. She tries to steady her breathing in case Pazuzu counterattacks, but she is suddenly attacked from behind by one of the wolves. The monsters that have been slain have had enough time to regenerate themselves, so she is drastically outnumbered now. Tao is pinned between the jaws of one of the wolves, and Pazuzu is taking some time to try to convince Tao to become his minion because everyone else is already knocked out, but he's still standing. So it is obvious that he's the hottest person by default. Immediately after saying this, he hits Tao with the full power blast of his mind-controlled breath, so you believe she should no longer have the presence of mind to deny his advances. However, through all that stink, All she came to realize is that she wasn't wrong after all when she sensed Robert's energy, because she is feeling it again, and she is sure he will kill Pazuzu, so she would rather die than become his minion. Pazuzu gives up on trying to convert her and just has the wolf eat the body so he can forget about Tao, because now he's moving on to Silpha, who he still has a grudge against for slashing up his minions earlier. He thinks it would be best to turn her into one of his minions, although it would probably take a long time due to her high mental fortitude. And while all the others have been decimated and possibly killed, Lloyd has just been splashing away in the river without a care in the world. Pazuzu goes on to gloat about how he will soak Silpha in his domination miasma until he replaced the person most precious to her in all her memories, and that way he'll have control over her for the rest of her life. Lloyd chimes in and asks if that's how he took control of the wolves, and Pazuzu, entranced by his own ego, gloats some more about how he killed the cubs' parents and then used his miasma to make them think that he was their parent all along, making them obedient to only him. Then after the brain lag finally wears off, Pazuzu realizes that there's still a human left standing, which shouldn't be possible, but Lloyd doesn't seem to be affected by it in the slightest. Pazuzu asks what kind of trick Lloyd must be using to survive in the miasma, but in all honesty, Lloyd has no idea how he's managing to do it either. Pazuzu feels insulted that Lloyd would just waltz in and ignore the effects of the miasma, but then he notices Grim, and he has a field day, calling him out as a failure of a demon for serving a human. Not to mention that chibi form, which is a disgrace to everything demons stand for. Grim was initially going to give Pazuzu some advice and tell him to back off because he can't defeat Lloyd, but now that he has shattered Grim's pride, Grim just wants to see him get wrecked. Pazuzu doesn't know what Grim is talking about, so he just sends a bunch of his minions out to kill him and Lloyd. However, Lloyd just smiles because he believes this is a perfect opportunity to test out the mana transmutation he had learned. Grim warns him that there are a lot of monsters here, so if he wants to get them all, he's going to have to use a decent chunk of mana, but Lloyd tells him he doesn't have to worry because he'll be careful not to go overboard. He has always had trouble adjusting the output of his mana to not instantly kill the target, but he manages to find the right balance and creates a flower field that reminds the wolves of their parents. In doing so, he also takes away Pazuzu's control over them, so they all obey Lloyd now. He takes a moment to look for the wolf that ate Tao, and once he finds it, he orders it to vomit her up right now, which it does, and she's still in one piece, but she's unconscious, slimy, and disrobed. Pazuzu realized that Lloyd must be some amazing sorcerer to have been able to convert that much of his mana into a flower field in an instant and take control of his minions, but he still thinks he can win control back, so he spits his breath at them and orders for them to return. And they are definitely returning, but I don't think it's in the way Pazuzu was hoping for. The monsters now remember the horrible treatment Pazuzu has subjected them to, as well as the fact that he killed their parents, so they all attack in unison. Lloyd is impressed with the teamwork the wolves are displaying, but Pazuzu is simply too strong for them, so he ends up beating up the dogs for betraying him. After he has taken care of the wolves, Pazuzu tells Lloyd that while he may have lost his minions, now that he doesn't have to supply them with mana, he is at full power, and even if he is a really good sorcerer, magic spells are ineffective against demons. Lloyd asks Grim whether what Pazuzu says is true about demons being immune to magic, but Grim can't exactly confirm it since all he knows is that no demon has ever been killed by magic before. Hearing this, Lloyd's curiosity is piqued since he now wants to find out if demons are truly invincible in the face of magic or if they are just really difficult to kill. And if it is the latter, then he wants to figure out what exactly it would take to kill Pazuzu. Lloyd unleashes the full extent of his mana, and in an instant, Pazuzu realizes he is a dead meat. Lloyd's mana is so dense that it might as well be unlimited void, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere near him when he gets like this. Lloyd says he is glad because he finally has a chance to test out a new spell, and since Pazuzu is a demon, then Lloyd doesn't need to worry about killing him because he has no human rights. Lloyd casts a barrier, but Pazuzu dodges it, and he immediately realizes that Lloyd isn't trying to fight him right now. He's trying to use his barriers to trap Pazuzu so he can run his experiments on him, and he isn't going to stick around to find out what kind of experiments those are going to be, so he starts trying to escape. Lloyd keeps chasing after him with barriers, and Grim joins in on the fun so Lloyd can cast even more barriers simultaneously. Pazuzu is scared out of his mind because of how fast Lloyd is casting the barriers, but he is still able to stay a step ahead and dodge them until he ends up getting caught in a mega barrier. It's over for Pazuzu now, but he can't accept that he has been caught like a lab rat, so he calls Lloyd a psychopath for wanting to perform experiments on him. But this confuses Lloyd, since while he may indeed be a psychopath, Pazuzu himself said magic attacks don't work on him, and besides, Lloyd can tell that Pazuzu performed experiments on those wolves he took control of, so it's a bit hypocritical of him to call Lloyd out for wanting to perform experiments of his own. Pazuzu suddenly wants to talking things out with Lloyd, but it's too late for him as Lloyd has already begun chanting the spell that will lead to his demise. He's casting all 4 elements at the highest level in sequence, and repeating it 100 times a second, so when he blasts Pazuzu with it, it looks like a colorful kaleidoscope, so Lloyd wants to keep it going for at least 30 minutes. However, after only 5 minutes in there, Pazuzu is already spent. Lloyd is disappointed because he really thought demons were immune to magic, so he could use Pazuzu as a guinea pig forever, but Grimm explains that it's more like demons are highly resistant to magic. So most powerful magic attacks end up feeling like an unpleasant ray of light or sound. However, when it's coming from someone as powerful as Lloyd, it's like being forced to experience 1,000 paper cuts a second. And all that stress likely fried Pazuzu's brain, so he's left contemplating the life decisions that led him to this fate. Just then, everyone finally starts waking up, so Lloyd panics because he needs to make up an excuse so that no one figures out that he's the one who defeated Pazuzu. He comes up with the idea to tell everyone that Robert came and saved the day, which they all believe without a second thought, and Tao begins frantically searching for him since she is still dead set on getting herself a boyfriend. Since the mission was a success, Albert and Lloyd return to the castle, where the king formally thanks Albert since on paper, he managed to perform his monster extermination duties as well as kill a demon while he was there, but the king still scolds him for taking such a risk and going out there with so few guards. But that aside, the king wants to give his thanks to the adventurers who helped him, so he asks where Tao and Robert are. Albert doesn't know where Robert went since Lloyd said he left before they all regained consciousness, but as for Tao, she was still giddy over the idea that Robert came to save her from getting eaten, but then she realized that the coat she was covered with actually belongs to Lloyd. So before she could put the pieces together, Lloyd distracts her by saying he saw Robert in the forest, and without a second thought or any clothes for that matter, she runs into the forest to find her future boyfriend. The king is disappointed since he wanted to meet Robert because he would have to be an incredibly powerful sorcerer for him to defeat a demon so quickly, but this is where Albert chimes in saying Lloyd was a huge contributor to the success of the mission. His enchantments allowed them to make it out of there with minimal casualties, so Albert believes it would be a good idea to add Lloyd to the race to succeed the throne. The king isn't against the idea, but he doesn't understand why Albert would advocate for an additional rival in throne succession. Albert doesn't care if he ends up becoming king or not. What he wants is for the most capable person to have the throne, so he believes Lloyd should get his chance as well. However, when the king asks Lloyd if he wants to be added to the list of throne successors, the only thing Lloyd has to say is, "Nah, I'm good." Later, Lloyd is out playing in the courtyard with his new pet, one of the bear wolves. It followed him home, but Grimm gets jealous of all the attention the wolf is getting, so he makes himself fluffy as well to get some attention from Lloyd. It indeed gets Lloyd to start playing with him, but then Silpha shows up, so he has to hide Grimm and shoves him inside the bear wolf's fur. Silpha asks if Lloyd has come up with a name for the wolf yet, and he has decided to call it Shiro. He's also planning on teaching it some commands, so Silpha suggests he might be able to use his mana to make Shiro obey him, and Lloyd likes the idea, so he immediately starts brainstorming ways to make it happen. Meanwhile, from a terrace of the castle, the king and Albert are having a chat about Lloyd, and the king thinks he is really modest for not wanting to get involved with the throne. But Albert believes Lloyd is just far too gifted to be limited by the responsibilities of ruling a country. But with that said, they can't wait to see what Lloyd does with his future, because it is sure to be something great. After a bit of practice, Lloyd has taught Shiro how to do a bunch of basic commands. However, he runs into issues when it comes to more complex commands like spin around 3 times. He has tried writing a command spell and sending it to Shiro, but it's not that Shiro doesn't want to do it, but rather, he doesn't understand what the command means, so he ends up just getting confused by it. The only way to get Shiro to understand the complex commands would be to consult someone who is extremely knowledgeable about monsters, so both Lloyd and Silpha start thinking about it, and they soon remember that they know someone who's really knowledgeable about monsters. Lloyd's sister, Elise, but she's a little weird, so they are both reluctant to meet with her. They head over to Elise's tower, and it's just as weird as they remember it being, so Grimm asks who Elise is meant to be. Lloyd provides a detailed explanation and tells Grimm that Elise is the 6th princess of the kingdom and 3 years older than him. In addition, as you could probably guess from her garden, she is an animal lover through and through. And not just of usual kinds either, as she'll keep anything that has a pulse and isn't human. Just then, Elise spots Lloyd, so she comes running down the stairs and jumps on top of him since she is so happy to see him. Lloyd says he's happy to see her as well, but then she kisses him out of nowhere, to the horror of both Silpha and Lloyd. Elise's personal maid, Eris, comes running down the stairs after her and scolds her for always kissing her brother every time he visits her, but she says she can't stop herself because she thinks Lloyd is so cute. After the shock wears off, they both sit down for some tea, and Elise asks what brings Lloyd here since he doesn't visit often. She thinks it has something to do with the cute bear wolf he brought with him, and she is right. Lloyd explains that the bear wolf's name is Shiro, and he is impressed that Elise could tell that Shiro was a bear wolf after seeing him for the first time. She can't really explain how she can tell these things, but all she knows is that she loves animals, and it probably has something to do with that mana thing everyone talks about. While Elise is fondling Shiro, Silpha goes up to Lloyd and suggests that they should leave since Elise isn't even familiar with the concept of mana, so there's no way she'll be able to teach him how to communicate with monsters using mana. Lloyd still thinks it's worth waiting a bit longer since she could still be helpful, so he asks Elise if she can show him one of her monsters. Elise smiles at him and says she already called one, which is when Lloyd and Silpha realize that there's a monster standing right behind them. Elise introduces it as Liru, who is a lesser Fenrir, which is Lloyd's interest peaked because not only was Liru able to sneak up behind him and Silpha without either of them noticing, but it also stole Silpha's bonnet. He wonders when Elise could have possibly given that command since Liru knew how to approach them from behind and snatch Silpha's bonnet. That's a pretty complex command, and she did all that without any indication of it, so Lloyd is wondering how she managed to do it. He enthusiastically asks her to teach him how to communicate with Shiro the way she just did with Liru, and she says she'll be happy to teach him. But the first lesson on the matter is a bit confusing because she says it's all about love. According to Elise, as long as you have love, you can grow to understand any monster, and once you do that, you can talk to them without needing words, which she demonstrates by calling all the animals around to her side. Just then, Lloyd realizes something, and a moment later, a bunch of animals come running towards him and the maids. A couple of them try to steal Eris and Silpha's clothes, but the ones that went to Lloyd are peacefully chilling on his head. He has just realized what he was doing wrong when he was trying to command Shiro. When Elise controls her pets, she isn't issuing commands to them in the first place. Instead, she just shares her will with the animals. So to replicate what she does, instead of ordering the animals around, Lloyd needs to share a mental image of what he wants, and then he sends that image over to Shiro. As soon as Shiro receives it, he understands what the assignment is, so he immediately starts running around Lloyd 3 times and leaps into the air with a bark. Lloyd is really happy since Shiro did exactly what he wanted, perfect down to the sound bark. Eris is amazed that Lloyd could actually learn something from Elise's love talk. Elise is so glad that someone finally understands her that she runs to hug Lloyd again, but she was still sharing her mental image with the pets, so all of them also hug Lloyd along with Silpha and Eris as well. So by the time Lloyd manages to get himself free, he is slightly traumatized and would rather not talk about it. On the bright side, he did manage to figure out how to connect with monsters through his meeting with Elise, and Silpha is glad he's happy. But she wants to spend time with Lloyd as well, so she suggests that they start sword practice immediately. However, before Lloyd can be dragged off and forced to practice for hours, Albert steps in and says he needs to talk to Lloyd about something, so they'll have to reschedule his sword practice for another day. Silpha tries to argue with Albert about Lloyd's sword training being extremely important, but Lloyd doesn't want to do it, so he decides to go with whatever Albert needs him for. Albert says that there's someone he wants Lloyd to meet, although he probably already knows him. It's Lloyd's brother, 4th Prince Dian. They head over to Dian's section of the castle where he talks about how he heard that Lloyd enchanted Albert's sword. Lloyd confirms it, but Dian is still skeptical that he could actually pull that off. He isn't going to say it's impossible that Lloyd did it, but it's hard for him to believe, so he wants Lloyd to prove his skill by enchanting a sword right in front of him. Albert explains that Dian is being so strict about this because he is a blacksmith and he takes his craft very seriously. He has prepared everything that Lloyd would need to enchant this sword, so Lloyd begins his enchanting process. However, Dian is made to eat his own words when Lloyd successfully enchants the sword right before his eyes. He can barely believe what he is holding in his hand because Lloyd somehow managed to cram 4 different enchantments on it, but he eventually just accepts that Lloyd must be a different breed of genius. He has moved on from his doubt and now excitedly asks Lloyd to help him fulfill his dream of creating the ultimate spellbound sword. He's referring to a sword that is forged with a spell engraved onto the steel, a super weapon that can only be created when a blacksmith and an enchanter work in unison. Dian tells Lloyd that he used to love sorcery when he was younger, but it didn't work out for him since he doesn't have a talent for it, which is why he developed an interest in spellbound swords, since with those, anyone can use magic regardless of talent. His dream is to one day make it so that everyone in the kingdom of Salim can use magic through the use of spellbound swords, whether they have talent or not. And Lloyd, listening to this whole thinking about how he doesn't give a fuck about Dian's dream, but learning how to make swords could be cool, so he decides to go along with it. After changing into a new outfit, Lloyd asks Diane what spell he wants to engrave onto the steel, and Diane doesn't have anything particular in mind, but he just wants it to be a fire spell. In that case, Lloyd suggests the Pyrolence spell since it's a good and powerful fire spell, but Diane doesn't think it will be possible to get it to work with a sword since the spell has 14 parts to it, but a spellbound sword is only able to hold 5 parts at most. But if that's the issue, then Lloyd says he'll just compress the spell into 2 parts. Diane can't believe Lloyd can do that, but he does it, and the pair move on to the next step of the production process, applying it to the metal. However, as Lloyd places the enchantment on the metal, the bar crumbles to pieces in an instant. Lloyd doesn't know what could have gone wrong, but he assumes that the spell may just have been too heavy for the steel to contain, so he asks Diane to try again with him. While Lloyd is drawing up some more enchantments, Diane notices Silpha staring at him from outside, and it's clear she wants to be included in Lloyd's project as well, so Diane invites her to join, but as they go for many more attempts, every single time they try to apply the enchantment, it shatters instantly. Lloyd apologizes for not being able to get it right and wasting so much of Diane's mana essence, but he really can't figure out what he is doing wrong here since he toned down the spell's strength to the point that it's just a basic fireball. Grim is surprised to see Lloyd having so much trouble with something since he always seems to learn things so quickly, but then he notices something off about the mana essence that Diane has. Meanwhile, Diane is being very supportive of Lloyd and doesn't blame him for not getting it right away, so he tells him that he doesn't have to worry since they can try as many times as needed, especially since he managed to get a ton of mana essence on sale at the dollar store. Hearing that, Lloyd realizes what's going on here, so he takes 1 glass of the mana essence and casts Purify on it, revealing that there's barely any hematite in there. The stuff Diane bought seems to be sufficient for things like regular enchantments, but something like a spellbound sword would probably require a higher concentration of hematite to pull off. Unfortunately, hematite is made of monster cores, and Diane doesn't have any just laying around, so Lloyd thinks he may have to sneak out of the castle again to go dungeon exploring, but then Silpha suggests the exact same thing. Lloyd is shocked since he knows there is a general belief that a young prince shouldn't head into a dungeon for no reason, but after the previous encounter with Pazuzu, Albert talked with the king about letting Lloyd try more new things in order to expand his horizons a bit, so since they have permission, she suggests they head to the guild to get things started. Lloyd and Silpha arrive at the guild a while later, and they are welcomed by the receptionist, Katarina, who gives them the required registration forms, and Lloyd is a little hesitant to fill it out since he is so young. But Silpha tells him it is alright to put the truth down. After he's done filling out the form, he's meant to touch the mana measuring orb, but Lloyd knows how these things work, and with his current mana, he is sure it would probably explode if he touched it, and that would draw too much attention. So he puts a lot of extra effort into suppressing his mana until it's down to almost nothing. Once he is done, he touches the orb, and although it doesn't explode, it still gives him a magic rating of A, which he finds weird since his mana should be at 1% of what it usually is. Even if the measurements say his magic is A since he has a 0 in all other stats, his overall rating is E, so a couple of nosy adventurers behind him start making fun of him. The receptionist is able to recognize talent though, so she compares Lloyd's potential to that of the legendary Silver Blade adventurer. The guys in the back are offended that someone would compare Lloyd to the Silver Blade because she was a phenomenon that tore through countless dungeons until she just disappeared one day. Meanwhile, the Silver Blade that is standing right in front of them asks to take on a dungeon quest with Lloyd. Unfortunately, Katarina tells her that an adventurer of at least B rank needs to be present for the quest to be approved, so Silpha says she'll just re-register with the guild since she was A rank back in the day. However, that won't work either since re-registering comes with a 2 rank demotion, so she still doesn't meet the requirements for the quest. Fortunately, there's someone here who can help them out, and it's Tao. Silpha asks why Tao is here since she was supposed to be looking for Robert, but she can't find him at all. And she searched through so many dungeons that she ended up becoming A rank, so she has accepted that she'll never see Robert again, which is why she wants Lloyd to introduce her to Albert instead and maybe set up a tea date. Since they now meet the requirements for the quest, they all head to a random dungeon where they'd breeze through and find the core in no time. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Albert goes to check in with Diane to see how the spellbound swords are coming along, and he's really optimistic about it, but they'll need to wait until Lloyd gets back with a core for the hematite. Unfortunately, Albert doesn't have a few days to wait since it looks like a war could be looming, and those swords would have been really useful. But he tells Diane that he doesn't need to worry about it since it's not his job to fight, but Diane still wants to be able to help, and it looks like he's going to get his chance since Lloyd has returned with the dungeon core, and they are able to use it to make the enchanted steel. And eventually, the spellbound sword has been created, but it's a little more powerful than Lloyd intended, so he plans to tone it down in the next models. After a long day's work, Lloyd settles down for the night, but before he can get any sleep, he notices that there's something in the garden, or rather someone. This was the end of episode 6. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.